We don't have the gold, Moon Princess. But what the Alpha King did behind her changed everything. The autumn wind swept through the cobblestone streets of Boston, carrying with it the scent of salt from the harbor and the distant clamor of merchant ships unloading their cargo. Eleanor Blackwood stood at the edge of the wharf, her dark cloak billowing behind her as she watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson. Her father's trading company had been the lifeblood of their family for 3 generations, but now it teetered on the brink of collapse. She clutched the leather satchel containing the last of their shipping documents, her fingers trembling despite her attempts to remain composed. The debts had piled up faster than she could count, creditors circling like vultures waiting for the final blow. Her father, once a proud and robust merchant, now lay bedridden in their townhouse on Beacon Hill, his health shattered by the stress of watching everything he'd built crumble around him. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means everything as we continue Eleanor's journey. Eleanor turned from the waterfront and made her way through the narrow streets toward the financial district. The gaslights were beginning to flicker to life, casting long shadows across the worn brick buildings. She had an appointment with Richard Thornton, the man who held the largest portion of her family's debts. The meeting filled her with dread, but she had no choice. She needed more time, and she would beg if necessary. The Thornton trading house loomed before her, a 3-story building of gray stone that seemed to absorb the fading light rather than reflect it. Eleanor climbed the steps and pushed through the heavy oak doors, finding herself in a dimly lit reception area, where a clerk with spectacles perched on his nose barely glanced up from his ledgers. "I have an appointment with Mr. Thornton," Eleanor said, her voice steadier than she felt. The clerk nodded toward a staircase. "Second floor, last door on the right." As Eleanor ascended the stairs, her heart hammered against her ribs. Each step felt heavier than the last. She reached the designated door and knocked twice, the sound echoing in the narrow hallway. "Enter," came a deep voice from within. Richard Thornton sat behind an imposing mahogany desk, his silver hair swept back from a face that might have been handsome had it not been hardened by years of ruthless business dealings. His gray eyes assessed Eleanor with the same calculating precision he likely applied to his account books. Behind him, standing near the window with his back partially turned, was another man Eleanor didn't immediately recognize. "Miss Blackwood," Thornton said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "Please, sit." Eleanor lowered herself into the chair, keeping her spine straight, despite the exhaustion weighing on her shoulders. "Mr. Thornton, I've come to discuss the terms of my father's debts. I understand the situation is dire, but I'm hoping we might negotiate an extension or a revised payment schedule." Thornton's expression remained unchanged, as cold and unyielding as granite. "Miss Blackwood, your father owes me $37,000. The ships he promised as collateral were seized by other creditors, and the warehouse on Long Wharf burned down 3 months ago. What exactly do you propose I accept as payment?" "Time," Eleanor said simply. "Give us 6 months. I can take over the remaining contracts, rebuild our client base. My father trained me in every aspect of the business. I know I can make this work." Thornton leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers beneath his chin. "And if you fail? What then?" "I'm not a charitable institution, Miss Blackwood. This is business." The man by the window finally turned, and Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. He was younger than Thornton, perhaps in his early 30s, with dark hair that fell just past his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. There was something about his presence that commanded attention, a quiet authority that seemed to fill the entire room. "Perhaps there's an alternative," the man said, his voice carrying a slight accent Eleanor couldn't quite place. "Miss Blackwood, allow me to introduce myself. I am Marcus Aldridge, recently arrived from England. I have certain business interests in the colonies, and I've been looking for someone with local knowledge to help me establish my operations here. Eleanor's eyes darted between the two men, confusion evident on her face. I don't understand. What does this have to do with my father's debts? Marcus moved closer, his footsteps barely audible on the thick carpet. Mr. Thornton and I have come to an arrangement. I will purchase your father's debts in full, and in return, you will work for me for 1 year. During that time, you'll help me navigate Boston's trading networks, introduce me to key merchants, and assist in building my enterprise here. At the end of the year, your debt will be considered paid in full. Eleanor's mind raced, trying to process the implications of such an offer. It seemed almost too convenient, yet the alternative was watching her family lose everything. And if I refuse? Thornton's smile was thin and humorless. Then I'll have no choice but to seize what remains of your father's assets and pursue legal action for the balance. Your family will be destitute, Miss Blackwood, I assure you. That is not an outcome you wish to experience. The weight of the decision pressed down on Eleanor like a physical force. She looked at Marcus, trying to read the intentions behind those inscrutable gray eyes. There was something he wasn't telling her, some hidden motivation that drove this sudden generosity. Men like him didn't make such offers without expecting significant returns. What exactly would my duties entail? Eleanor asked carefully. Marcus pulled a chair from against the wall and sat down, creating an informal triangle with Eleanor and Thornton. Initially, introductions and guidance. I need to understand how business is conducted here, who the important players are, what opportunities exist. Later, as I establish my holdings, I may require your expertise in specific ventures. Nothing that would compromise your integrity, I assure you. Eleanor studied his face, searching for any sign of deception. His expression remained neutral, almost sympathetic, but she sensed layers beneath that calm exterior. I would need assurances that this arrangement wouldn't damage my family's remaining reputation. And I wanted in writing that after 1 year, all debts are forgiven completely. Agreed, Marcus said without hesitation. He glanced at Thornton, who nodded curtly and began pulling documents from a drawer in his desk. As Thornton prepared the papers, Eleanor found herself stealing glances at Marcus. He carried himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Yet there was a restlessness about him, as if he were constantly calculating his next move. His clothes were well-tailored but not ostentatious, the mark of someone who had wealth but didn't feel the need to advertise it. Miss Blackwood, Marcus said, drawing her attention back to him. I understand this must seem sudden, but I want you to know that I have no intention of exploiting your difficult situation. I genuinely need assistance from someone who knows this city, and you come highly recommended. Recommended by whom? Eleanor asked sharply. A slight smile played at the corners of Marcus's mouth. Your father's former business partners speak well of your intelligence and work ethic. I've made inquiries about several potential candidates, and your name appeared repeatedly. The revelation that he had been investigating her before this meeting should have alarmed Eleanor, but instead she felt a strange mixture of curiosity and wariness. This man had planned this encounter carefully, which suggested both cunning and patience. Thornton pushed a stack of papers across the desk toward Eleanor. Everything is in order. Mr. Aldridge will assume all your father's debts immediately upon your signature. The terms of your employment are outlined here, including the provision that after 12 months of satisfactory service, all obligations will be considered fulfilled. Eleanor took the papers with unsteady hands and began reading through them carefully. The legal language was dense, but she forced herself to understand every clause. As she read, she became aware of Marcus watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. The terms were surprisingly fair. She would receive a modest salary in addition to the debt forgiveness, enough to maintain her family's household and provide for her father's medical care. Her duties were defined broadly but not unreasonably. There were no hidden clauses or deceptive provisions that she could detect. There's one thing I need to clarify, Eleanor said, looking up from the documents. What happens if my father passes away during this year? The stress has taken a terrible toll on his health. Marcus's expression softened almost imperceptibly. The arrangement remains between you and me. Your father's death, should it occur, would not alter the terms. You would continue your employment, and at the end of the year, any remaining claims against his estate would be dissolved. Eleanor felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, but refused to let them fall. She would not show weakness in front of these men, not now. She picked up the pen Thornton had placed beside the documents and signed her name in firm, clear script. "Excellent," Thornton said, gathering the papers with evident satisfaction. "Mr. Aldridge, the funds will be transferred to my accounts by end of business tomorrow?" "They'll be there by noon," Marcus replied, standing and extending his hand to Eleanor. "Miss Blackwood, shall we discuss the particulars of your new position over dinner? I've secured rooms at the Parker House, and their dining room is said to be quite acceptable." Eleanor rose slowly, accepting his hand briefly before withdrawing. "I should return home to check on my father first. Perhaps we could meet tomorrow morning instead." "Of course," Marcus said smoothly. 10 o'clock at my hotel? We have much to discuss, and I'm eager to begin our partnership." Eleanor nodded, gathering her cloak around her shoulders. As she turned to leave, she caught Marcus and Thornton exchanging a look she couldn't quite interpret. A chill ran down her spine, but she pushed it aside. She had made her choice, and there was no going back now. The walk back to Beacon Hill felt longer than usual, as if the city itself had grown larger and more complicated. Eleanor's mind churned with questions about Marcus Aldridge and his true intentions. Why had he really come to Boston? What business interests required such elaborate arrangements? And why had he chosen her specifically when there were surely others who could provide the same services? She arrived at her family's townhouse as darkness fully settled over the city. The building had seen better days, its brick facade showing signs of neglect that Eleanor couldn't afford to repair. She let herself in through the front door and immediately heard the labored breathing coming from her father's room on the second floor. Martha, their elderly housekeeper who had stayed with them despite going unpaid for months, appeared from the kitchen. "He's been asking for you, miss. Had a difficult afternoon." Eleanor climbed the stairs quickly, her heart sinking with each step. Her father's bedroom smelled of medicine and sickness, the heavy curtains drawn against the evening chill. Robert Blackwood lay propped against pillows, his once robust frame now thin and fragile. His eyes opened as Eleanor entered, and a weak smile crossed his face. "Eleanor," he whispered. "How did the meeting go?" Eleanor sat on the edge of his bed and took his hand, feeling how cold and papery his skin had become. "It's resolved, Father. The debts are being assumed by another merchant, and I've secured employment that will see us through this difficult time." Relief washed over her father's face, and tears leaked from the corners of his eyes. "I never wanted this for you. You should be married to a good man, not cleaning up my failures." "You didn't fail," Eleanor said firmly. "The economic downturn affected everyone. You made the best decisions you could with the information you had. Now rest, and let me worry about the future." Her father's grip tightened slightly on her hand. "This merchant who bought the debts, do you trust him?" Eleanor paused, considering her answer carefully. "I don't know him well enough yet to say. But the terms are fair, and we have little choice regardless." "Be careful, Eleanor. Men who make such generous offers usually want something beyond what they state openly." "I know, Father. I'll be careful." She sat with him until he drifted into an uneasy sleep, then returned downstairs to find Martha waiting with a simple meal of bread and soup. Eleanor ate mechanically, her mind already turning toward tomorrow's meeting with Marcus. The next morning dawned gray and cold, with low clouds threatening rain. Eleanor dressed carefully in her best remaining dress, a dark blue wool that had seen better days, but still maintained an air of respectability. She arranged her dark hair in a simple style that spoke of practicality rather than fashion, wanting to project competence and seriousness. The Parker House Hotel occupied a prominent position in the heart of Boston, its elegant facade a testament to the city's growing prosperity. Eleanor had never actually been inside, as it catered to wealthy travelers and businessmen far above her family's current social station. She entered through the main doors and found herself in a lavishly appointed lobby with marble floors and crystal chandeliers. A desk clerk directed her to a private dining room on the second floor, where Marcus was apparently waiting. Eleanor climbed the carpeted stairs and knocked on the designated door. "Come in," Marcus called. The private dining room was smaller than Eleanor had expected, intimate rather than formal. A table set for two stood by a window overlooking the street below, where morning traffic was beginning to pick up. Marcus stood as she entered, dressed in dark trousers and a white shirt with his coat draped over a nearby chair. "Miss Blackwood, thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to the table. "I took the liberty of ordering breakfast. I hope you don't mind." Eleanor settled into the chair he held for her, acutely aware of how close he stood before moving to his own seat. "Thank you. I confess I'm eager to understand exactly what you expect from our arrangement." Marcus poured coffee into her cup, the rich aroma filling the small space. "Direct and to the point. I appreciate that quality." He sat back and regarded her thoughtfully. "What do you know about the fur trade, Miss Blackwood?" The question caught Eleanor off guard. It centered primarily in the Northern Territories and Canada. The Hudson's Bay Company controls much of it, though there are smaller operations. "Why do you ask?" "Because that's where my interests lie," Marcus said. "I've spent the last 5 years establishing trading relationships with various indigenous tribes in the Western Territories. I have access to premium furs that can command exceptional prices in European markets, but I lack the infrastructure to move them efficiently through American ports." Eleanor's mind began working through the logistics. You need warehouse space, reliable ships, and connections with European buyers. You also need someone who understands the customs regulations and can navigate the local merchant networks. "Precisely," Marcus said, a note of approval in his voice. "Your father's company, before its troubles, had exactly those capabilities. I'm hoping to rebuild something similar using my capital and your knowledge." A server arrived with plates of eggs, bacon, and fresh bread, temporarily interrupting their conversation. Once they were alone again, Eleanor leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Aldridge, while I appreciate your candor, I find myself wondering why you chose such an elaborate method of securing my services. You could have simply offered me employment directly, rather than purchasing my father's debts." Marcus set down his fork and met her gaze directly. "Because I needed you to have no choice but to commit fully to this venture for a substantial period. What I'm building here requires time and patience, and I couldn't risk you deciding after a few months that you'd rather pursue other opportunities." The honesty of his answer was almost shocking in its bluntness. Eleanor found herself reassessing him once again. "You're not what I expected," she said quietly. "Neither are you," Marcus replied with a slight smile. "The reports I received described you as intelligent and capable, but they failed to mention your remarkable composure under pressure. Last night, you signed away a year of your life without showing the slightest hint of panic." "What choice did I have?" Eleanor asked, a hint of bitterness creeping into her voice. "None," Marcus admitted. "But how you handled that lack of choice spoke volumes about your character." They continued their breakfast in more comfortable silence for a few minutes before Marcus pulled a leather portfolio from beneath the table. "I've prepared a preliminary overview of what I need to accomplish in the next 6 months. I'd like your assessment of its feasibility." Eleanor spent the next hour reviewing Marcus's plans, asking questions, and offering suggestions based on her knowledge of Boston's trading infrastructure. His vision was ambitious but not impossible, requiring careful coordination and substantial investment. What impressed her most was his willingness to listen to her input, actually modifying his approach based on her recommendations. "There's one significant obstacle I haven't mentioned yet," Marcus said as they were finishing their review. Not everyone in Boston will welcome my presence here. I have competitors who would prefer I failed, and some of them have considerable influence in this city. Who specifically? Eleanor asked. Marcus hesitated, then said, Richard Thornton, for one. Eleanor's eyes widened, but he facilitated our arrangement. He sold you my father's debts. He did, Marcus agreed, because I paid him more than those debts were worth, and because he believes I'll fail within 6 months. When I do, he expects to purchase my assets at a fraction of their value. So this is personal, Eleanor said slowly, beginning to understand the deeper currents at play. It's business, Marcus corrected. But yes, there's history between us. Thornton and I competed for certain trading rights in the Northern Territories. He lost, and he's the type of man who neither forgets nor forgives. Eleanor sat back in her chair, processing this new information. She had walked into something far more complicated than a simple business arrangement. What exactly have I gotten myself into, Mr. Aldridge? A war, Marcus said simply. Not with swords or guns, but with ledgers and contracts and trade agreements. And I need someone beside me who knows this battlefield as well as I know the frontier. The magnitude of what he was proposing finally became clear to Eleanor. He wasn't just rebuilding a trading company. He was establishing a foothold in a city where powerful men would work actively against him. And he had chosen her not despite her desperate circumstances, but because of them, knowing she would have no choice but to commit fully to his success. I should be angry with you for manipulating me, Eleanor said quietly. You have every right to be, Marcus replied. But anger won't change our situation. We're bound together now, whether by circumstance or design. The question is, whether we work together as true partners, or simply fulfill the minimum requirements of our contract. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment, seeing past the carefully maintained facade to the determination beneath. Here was a man who had calculated every move, yet who was now offering her the choice to be more than just an employee following orders. Partners, Eleanor said finally. But I have conditions. Marcus smiled, genuine warmth breaking through his usual reserve. I would have been disappointed if you didn't. I want to understand all aspects of your business, not just what directly concerns me. I want to attend meetings, review contracts, and participate in strategic decisions. And I want weekly reports on our financial position. Agreed, Marcus said without hesitation. I also want the right to veto any decision that I believe would harm my family's remaining reputation. Marcus considered this more carefully before nodding. Agreed, with the caveat that we discuss any such vetoes thoroughly before making final decisions. And one last thing, Eleanor said, her voice taking on a harder edge. You will never lie to me again. If there are things you cannot tell me, say so directly. But no more manipulation, no more hidden agendas. If we're to be partners, there must be trust. The request seemed to affect Marcus more deeply than Eleanor expected. Something flickered across his face, too quick for her to identify, before his usual controlled expression returned. You have my word, he said solemnly. From this moment forward, I will be completely honest with you. They shook hands across the table, and Eleanor felt the calloused strength in his grip. These were not the soft hands of a man who spent his days behind a desk. Marcus Aldridge had clearly spent time in harder circumstances, doing work that required physical labor and endurance. Over the following weeks, Eleanor threw herself into her new role with determined energy. Marcus had secured a small warehouse near the waterfront to serve as their base of operations, and Eleanor spent long days there organizing inventory, meeting with potential clients, and beginning to rebuild the network of contacts her father had once maintained. The work was exhausting, but invigorating in a way Eleanor hadn't experienced in months. Instead of watching helplessly as everything collapsed, she was building something new. Marcus proved to be a demanding but fair employer, expecting excellence but willing to explain his reasoning and accept input when she disagreed with his approaches. They developed a routine of meeting each morning to review the previous day's progress and plan the current day's priorities. These meetings often stretched for hours as they debated strategy and shared information about the constantly shifting landscape of Boston's trading networks. One morning in early December, Eleanor arrived at the warehouse to find Marcus in conversation with a rough-looking man dressed in buckskin and fur. The stranger had the weathered face of someone who spent most of his time outdoors, and he studied Eleanor with sharp, assessing eyes as she approached. "Miss Blackwood," Marcus said, "allow me to introduce John Whitmore, one of my partners from the Northern Territories. John, this is Eleanor Blackwood, who I told you about." Whitmore extended a hand that was even more calloused than Marcus's. "Pleasure, ma'am. Marcus says you're the one who's going to help us move our goods through this city without getting robbed or cheated." Eleanor smiled, despite the crude directness of his statement. "That's certainly the plan, Mr. Whitmore. How long will you be staying in Boston?" "Just long enough to deliver the season's take and pick up supplies for the journey back," Whitmore replied. "Got 40 crates of prime pelts on the wagon outside. Marcus says you can get them sold within a week." Eleanor's eyes widened. 40 crates represented a substantial quantity of furs, worth potentially thousands of dollars if the quality was as good as Whitmore suggested. "I'll need to inspect the goods and make some inquiries with buyers, but yes, I believe I can arrange sales within that time frame." Over the next several days, Eleanor worked tirelessly to catalog and grade the furs Whitmore had brought. The quality was indeed exceptional, far superior to what typically came through Boston's markets. She contacted several of her father's old clients, as well as new prospects Marcus had identified, arranging private viewings and negotiating prices. The sales exceeded even Eleanor's optimistic projections. By the end of the week, they had moved all 40 crates at prices that left a substantial profit, even after covering their operating expenses and Whitmore's share. It was their first major success, and Eleanor felt a surge of pride at what they had accomplished together. On the evening after the last sale concluded, Marcus invited Eleanor to dinner at a small tavern near the waterfront. It was far less formal than the Parker House, a place where merchants and sailors gathered to share news and conduct business in a relaxed atmosphere. They found a quiet table in the corner, and Marcus ordered wine along with their meals. "To our first major success," he said, raising his glass. Eleanor touched her glass to his, feeling genuinely pleased for the first time in months. "To partnership," she replied. As they ate, the conversation drifted away from business for the first time since they'd begun working together. Eleanor found herself genuinely curious about Marcus's life before Boston, about what had driven him to the frontier, and what he hoped to ultimately achieve. "Why did you really come to Boston?" she asked, emboldened slightly by the wine. "You could have established your operation in New York or Philadelphia, cities with larger trading networks." Marcus swirled the wine in his glass thoughtfully. "Because Boston has something those other cities lack. A certain Puritan work ethic and a merchant class that understands the value of long-term relationships over quick profits. The people here think in terms of building dynasties, not just making money." "And is that what you want? To build a dynasty?" "I want to build something that lasts," Marcus said carefully. "Something more meaningful than simply accumulating wealth. The frontier changes you, Miss Blackwood. Out there, you see how fragile our civilized world really is, how quickly everything we take for granted can disappear. It makes you want to create something solid, something that will endure." Eleanor heard the passion underlying his words and realized she was seeing yet another layer of this complicated man. "Is that why you work so hard? Why you plan everything so meticulously?" "Partly," Marcus admitted, "but also because I've seen what happens when you leave things to chance. The frontier teaches you that luck is unreliable, that survival depends on preparation and careful thinking." "That sounds like a lonely way to live," Eleanor observed quietly. Marcus met her eyes across the table, and for a moment, the careful control he maintained seemed to slip. "It has been," he said simply. The moment stretched between them, charged with an unexpected intimacy. Eleanor felt her heart beating faster, acutely aware of how the candlelight played across Marcus's features, softening the hard edges she usually saw there. "We should get back," Eleanor said, breaking the moment before it could develop into something neither of them was prepared to address. "I need to check on my father, and we have an early meeting tomorrow with the shipwright." Marcus nodded, though something in his expression suggested disappointment. "Of course. I'll walk you home." The streets of Boston were quiet as they made their way toward Beacon Hill, their footsteps echoing on the cobblestones. They walked in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts about what had just passed between them. When they reached Eleanor's townhouse, Marcus paused at the foot of the steps. "Miss Blackwood, I want you to know that I value our partnership more than any business success we might achieve. You've exceeded every expectation I had." "Thank you," Eleanor said, feeling a warmth spread through her chest at his words. "Though I suspect you had very high expectations to begin with." Marcus smiled, that rare, genuine expression that transformed his usually serious face. Guilty as charged. "Good night, Eleanor." It was the first time he had used her given name without the formal Miss Blackwood attached. Eleanor felt the shift in their relationship, subtle but undeniable. "Good night, Marcus." As she watched him walk away into the darkness, Eleanor wondered what she was really getting herself into. This arrangement had started as a desperate solution to impossible circumstances, but it was becoming something far more complex and potentially dangerous to her carefully guarded heart. Winter settled over Boston with heavy snows and bitter winds that swept in from the Atlantic. Business slowed as ships stayed in harbor, and merchants waited for spring to resume their usual trading patterns. Eleanor used this quieter time to strengthen their relationships with key clients and plan for the busy season ahead. Her father's health continued to decline despite the relief that paying off his debts had brought. Eleanor spent her evenings at his bedside, reading to him from his favorite books and sharing stories about her work with Marcus. Robert Blackwood seemed comforted by knowing his daughter had found a path forward, even if he didn't fully understand the complexities of her arrangement. Marcus became a regular visitor to their home, ostensibly to discuss business, but often staying for dinner and conversation. Martha clearly approved of him, going so far as to prepare her best dishes when she knew he was coming. Even Eleanor's father, in his lucid moments, seemed to appreciate Marcus's company and his obvious respect for Eleanor's abilities. One evening in late January, as snow fell heavily outside, Marcus arrived with news that would change everything. Eleanor saw immediately that something was wrong. His usual composure was cracked, his movements tight with barely contained anger. "What's happened?" Eleanor asked, leading him into their small sitting room away from her father's room. Marcus paced to the window, staring out at the swirling snow. "Thornton has made his move. He's convinced the harbor master to implement new inspection procedures that will delay our shipments by weeks. Every crate we bring through the port will need to be opened and cataloged individually, supposedly to prevent smuggling." Eleanor's mind raced through the implications. "But that will kill our entire business model. We can't keep fresh furs sitting in a warehouse for weeks waiting for inspection. They'll lose value, and our buyers will go to other suppliers." "Exactly," Marcus said grimly. "And Thornton knows it. This is his play to force me out of Boston before I can establish a strong enough position to resist him." "There has to be a way around it," Eleanor said, moving to stand beside him at the window. "Some legal challenge we can file, or perhaps we could find alternative routes through smaller ports." Marcus shook his head. "The smaller ports don't have the infrastructure we need, and legal challenges take time we don't have. Whitmore is scheduled to arrive with our spring shipment in 6 weeks. If we can't move those furs quickly, we'll lose everything we've built." Eleanor watched the snow fall for a long moment, thinking through various scenarios and possibilities. Then an idea began to form. Risky, but potentially viable. What if we don't bring the furs through Boston at all? Marcus turned to look at her, interest flickering in his eyes. "Go on. What if we arrange to have them shipped directly to New York or Philadelphia?" We could establish temporary operations there, sell the goods, then use the profits to fight Thornton's restrictions from a position of strength rather than desperation. That would require significant investment up front, Marcus said slowly, clearly thinking through the logistics. We'd need to secure warehouse space, establish new buyer relationships, arrange transportation. All of which takes time and money we don't have, Eleanor finished. Unless we take on a partner, someone with existing infrastructure in those cities who could facilitate our operations. Marcus's expression hardened. I don't trust easily, Eleanor. Bringing in another partner means sharing both profits and information about our operations. I know, Eleanor said, but sometimes trust is less expensive than pride. The words hung between them, carrying weight beyond their immediate practical application. Marcus studied her face for a long moment, before a slight smile curved his lips. You're right, of course. Do you have someone in mind? Actually, I do, Eleanor said, feeling excitement building as the plan took shape in her mind. My father's former partner, Samuel Morrison, moved his operations to New York 3 years ago. He and my father had a falling out over business philosophy. But he's an honorable man, and he has exactly the kind of infrastructure we need. Will he be willing to help given the circumstances? Eleanor considered carefully before answering. I think so, if I approach him correctly. He felt guilty about leaving my father when things started to go badly. This might be his chance to make amends. Over the next several days, Eleanor and Marcus worked frantically to put together a proposal for Morrison. They calculated costs, projected revenues, and drafted terms for a temporary partnership that would allow them to weather Thornton's attack while maintaining their independence long-term. Eleanor made the journey to New York by train, a cold and uncomfortable trip that took the better part of a day. She'd only been to New York once before, and the city's size and chaos still overwhelmed her compared to Boston's more manageable scale. Morrison's offices occupied the 3rd floor of a building overlooking the East River. The man himself looked older than Eleanor remembered, his hair completely gray now, and lines of worry etched deeply around his eyes. But his face lit up with genuine warmth when his secretary showed Eleanor into his office. Eleanor Blackwood, he said, coming around his desk to take both her hands in his. I heard about your father's troubles. I'm so sorry I couldn't help, but my own situation was precarious at the time. I understand, Mr. Morrison, Eleanor said. I'm not here seeking charity or dwelling on the past. I'm here with a business proposition. She spent the next hour laying out their plan, watching Morrison's expression shift from surprise to interest to calculation as he absorbed the details. When she finished, he sat back in his chair and stroked his beard thoughtfully. This Marcus Aldridge, Morrison said finally. What kind of man is he? Eleanor chose her words carefully. He's ambitious, intelligent, and absolutely committed to building something lasting. He doesn't trust easily, but once you earn his trust, he's loyal. And he has access to goods of exceptional quality through his frontier connections. And what about you, Eleanor? What's your role in all this? Partner, Eleanor said firmly. Not employee, not assistant, partner. Morrison smiled approvingly. Your father would be proud of you. He always said you had better business instincts than half the merchants in Boston. He paused, then nodded decisively. All right, I'm in. But I want to meet this Aldridge before we finalize anything. If he's half as capable as you say, we might build something more permanent than just a temporary arrangement. Eleanor felt relief wash over her. Thank you, Mr. Morrison. I'll arrange for Marcus to come to New York next week. One more thing, Morrison said, as Eleanor gathered her papers. Be careful with Thornton. He's vindictive and he has long reach. Men like him don't forgive perceived slights, and they don't fight fair. I'm beginning to understand that, Eleanor said quietly. The meeting between Marcus and Morrison went better than Eleanor had dared hope. The two men recognized in each other the same qualities that had drawn Eleanor to trust them: competence, integrity, and a willingness to think long-term rather than pursue quick profits. By the end of their second meeting, they had hammered out an agreement that gave Morrison a 20% stake in their venture for 2 years in exchange for use of his New York facilities and his network of buyers. With the New York arrangement secured, Eleanor and Marcus returned to Boston to finalize the logistics of rerouting their spring shipment. They sent a messenger north to intercept Whitmore with the change of plans. Then began the painstaking process of coordinating with Morrison's team to ensure everything would be ready when the furs arrived. But Thornton wasn't finished with them yet. 2 weeks before the shipment was due to arrive in New York, Eleanor received word that her father had taken a turn for the worse. She rushed home to find him barely conscious, his breathing shallow and labored. The doctor could offer little hope, saying it was only a matter of time now. Eleanor sent word to Marcus, then settled in at her father's bedside. She held his hand through the long night, remembering all the times he had been there for her, teaching her the business, encouraging her curiosity, never treating her as less capable simply because she was a woman. Marcus arrived before dawn, finding Eleanor red-eyed but composed in her father's room. He didn't say anything, simply pulled a chair close to hers and sat in supportive silence. When her father woke briefly and recognized them both, he managed a weak smile. "Take care of her," Robert Blackwood whispered to Marcus, the words barely audible. "I will," Marcus promised. "You have my word." Robert's eyes shifted to Eleanor. "Be happy, daughter. Don't spend your life trapped by duty and obligation. Find joy wherever you can." "I will, Father," Eleanor said through tears she could no longer hold back. "I promise." Her father's grip on her hand loosened as he slipped back into unconsciousness. He died just as the sun was rising, with Eleanor and Marcus both there keeping vigil. Martha came in to help prepare the body, while Eleanor simply sat, feeling numb and hollow. Marcus remained with her through the terrible practicalities that followed death. He helped arrange the funeral, contacted the few remaining family members and friends who should be notified, and dealt with the countless details that Eleanor couldn't bring herself to address. His quiet competence and steady presence kept her grounded when everything else seemed to be falling apart. The funeral was small, attended by a handful of her father's old colleagues, and a surprising number of people Eleanor didn't recognize. Afterward, Marcus explained that many were former employees, or people her father had helped over the years, come to pay their respects to a man they remembered as fair and generous. In the days following the funeral, Eleanor threw herself back into work with desperate intensity. She couldn't bear to sit idle with her grief, so she worked from dawn until exhaustion forced her to sleep. Marcus understood and matched her pace, working beside her without comment on the fevered quality of her dedication. The spring shipment arrived in New York on schedule, and Eleanor made the journey there to oversee the sales personally. The results exceeded their projections, generating profits that not only covered their operating costs, but left enough capital to begin expanding their operations. Morrison was impressed enough that he proposed making their partnership permanent, rather than temporary. But success brought its own complications. Word of their triumph reached Boston before Eleanor did, and she returned to find Thornton had escalated his campaign against them. He had spread rumors about Marcus's business practices, suggesting he was cheating the frontier trappers and using questionable methods to secure his trade agreements. The rumors were baseless, but they damaged Marcus's reputation among the more conservative Boston merchants. Eleanor found Marcus in their warehouse office, staring at a notice that had been nailed to the door. It warned that anyone doing business with the unscrupulous Marcus Aldridge risked being ostracized by the legitimate merchant community. The crude language and threatening tone made Eleanor's blood boil. "This is slander," she said hotly. "We should take legal action." "And tie ourselves up in courts for months while Thornton continues his attacks?" Marcus shook his head. "No, we need a different approach." "What do you suggest?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment before answering. "We expose him. Show everyone exactly what kind of man he really is and what methods he uses to eliminate competition." "How?" Eleanor asked. "We'd need proof of wrongdoing. and Thornton is too careful to leave obvious evidence. A dangerous smile crossed Marcus's face. Then we'll have to make him reveal himself. But it will be risky, and it will require you to trust me completely, even when you don't understand what I'm doing. Eleanor thought about everything they had been through together, all the times Marcus had proven himself worthy of her trust. She thought about her father's deathbed words about finding joy and not being trapped by obligation. And she realized that somewhere along the way, her feelings for Marcus had transformed from professional respect into something far deeper and more complicated. "I trust you," she said simply. "What do you need me to do?" Over the next several weeks, Marcus put his plan into motion with meticulous care. He began making intentionally visible mistakes in their public business dealings, small errors that suggested he was overextended and struggling. At the same time, he quietly purchased shares in several of Thornton's business ventures through third parties, positioning himself to have influence when the time came. Eleanor played her part by appearing increasingly distressed in public, as if the strain of their partnership was taking a toll. She made carefully scripted complaints to mutual acquaintances about Marcus's demanding nature and unreasonable expectations. The gossip spread quickly through Boston's tight-knit merchant community. Thornton took the bait exactly as Marcus had predicted. Sensing weakness, he made a direct offer to buy out their remaining Boston operations at a fraction of their actual value. The meeting took place in Thornton's office, the same room where Eleanor had first signed away a year of her life. "You've fought admirably," Thornton said with false sympathy. "But sometimes it's better to accept reality than to keep struggling against inevitable defeat. My offer is generous given your current circumstances." Marcus appeared to consider carefully before shaking his head. "I appreciate the offer, but I think we can still turn this around." "With what resources?" Thornton asked, his voice taking on a harder edge. "Everyone knows you're hemorrhaging money. Your little arrangement with Morrison in New York can't possibly cover your losses here, and Miss Blackwood is clearly at the end of her patience with your schemes." "Is that what you think?" Eleanor asked quietly, speaking for the first time since they had entered the office. Something in her tone made Thornton pause. "I think," he said slowly, "that you're an intelligent woman who's been taken advantage of by a man with more ambition than sense." Eleanor stood, and Marcus rose beside her. "Then you've made the same mistake many men do, Mr. Thornton. You assumed I was a victim rather than a partner." Marcus pulled several folders from his satchel and laid them on Thornton's desk. "These contain documentation of every underhanded tactic you've used against us and numerous other merchants over the past 5 years. Bribes to port officials, fraudulent cargo manifests, intimidation of potential competitors. All of it meticulously documented and verified." Thornton's face went pale as he flipped through the pages. "How did you—" "It turns out people are remarkably willing to talk when they believe they're speaking confidentially with someone who has already failed," Marcus said. "And when you're as arrogant as you are, Richard, you tend to keep very detailed records of your victories." "This is theft," Thornton said, his voice shaking with rage. "No," Eleanor corrected. "This is evidence of your crimes. Evidence that will turn over to the authorities unless you agree to cease all operations against us and compensate us for the damages you've caused to our business." "You're bluffing," Thornton said, but his voice lacked conviction. Marcus leaned forward. "Try me. I've already lost everything once and rebuilt from nothing. I'm not afraid to do it again, and I promise you that this time I'll take you down with me." The room fell silent as Thornton weighed his options. Eleanor could see the calculation in his eyes, the same cold assessment he applied to all his business decisions. Finally, he seemed to deflate slightly. "What exactly are you demanding?" Marcus outlined their terms. Thornton would pay them $50,000 in compensation, publicly retract all negative statements about their business practices, and sign a binding agreement not to interfere with their operations in any way for a period of 10 years. In exchange, they would keep the evidence private and not pursue criminal charges. "You're insane if you think I'll agree to that," Thornton said. "Then I guess we'll see you in court," Eleanor replied calmly. "Though I suspect your reputation won't survive the trial, regardless of the verdict." It took 3 more meetings over 2 weeks before Thornton finally capitulated. He signed the agreement with visible reluctance, his hand shaking with barely suppressed rage. As Eleanor and Marcus left his office for the final time, Marcus allowed himself a satisfied smile. "We did it," he said quietly. "We did," Eleanor agreed. But instead of feeling triumphant, she felt oddly hollow. The battle that had consumed their lives for months was over, and suddenly she wasn't sure what came next. They walked toward the waterfront in silence, both lost in thought. The spring afternoon was warm and pleasant, with ships moving lazily in the harbor and gulls calling overhead. When they reached their warehouse, Marcus paused before going inside. "Eleanor, there's something I need to tell you." The seriousness in his tone made Eleanor's heart skip. "What is it?" "The year we agreed to is almost over. In 2 weeks, your obligation to me will be fulfilled. The debt is paid, and you'll be free to pursue whatever path you choose." Eleanor realized with shock that he was right. So much had happened. So much had changed, that she had lost track of time. The year that had seemed like an eternity when she first signed those papers had passed in what felt like moments. "What will you do?" she asked carefully. "Expand the business, probably," Marcus said. "Morrison and I have discussed opening operations in Philadelphia as well. There's a lot of opportunity if we move quickly." "That sounds like a good plan," Eleanor said, feeling her throat tighten. Marcus turned to face her fully. "I want you to stay, not because of any obligation or contract, but because He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "Because you've become essential to everything I'm building. Because I trust you more than anyone I've ever known. Because I can't imagine doing this without you." Eleanor's heart was racing now. "Marcus, and because I've fallen in love with you," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "I know I have no right to feel this way, that I manipulated you into this situation, that I've given you every reason to resent me. But it's the truth, and I promised I would never lie to you again." Eleanor stood frozen, trying to process what she was hearing. She thought about the past year, about all the times she had caught herself watching him when she should have been focused on work, about how his rare smiles made her heart flutter, about how safe she felt when he was beside her. "You're wrong about one thing," she said finally. Marcus's face fell. "I understand. I shouldn't have said—" "You didn't manipulate me into anything," Eleanor interrupted. "You gave me a choice when I had no choices left. And yes, you've been calculating and strategic, but you've also been honest and honorable in ways that matter. You've treated me as an equal when most men would have kept me at a distance. You've trusted my judgment and valued my input." "Eleanor, I'm not finished," she said, stepping closer to him. "I've fallen in love with you too, though I've been too stubborn and proud to admit it, even to myself. And I want to stay, not because of any contract or obligation, but because I choose to. Because we've built something real together, and I want to see where it leads." Marcus reached up to cup her face gently with one hand. "Are you sure? I need you to be completely certain. Because once we cross this line, there's no going back to being just business partners." "I'm certain," Eleanor said firmly. She leaned into his touch, feeling more grounded and right than she had in months. "Though, I should warn you, I have no intention of being a silent partner in any aspect of our partnership, business or otherwise." Marcus laughed, the sound full of genuine joy. "I would expect nothing less." Then he kissed her, and Eleanor felt something inside her finally settle into place. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. "So what happens now?" Eleanor smiled. "Now we get back to work. We have a business to run, territories to expand into, and probably more battles to fight along the way. But we do it together, as equal partners in everything. Everything, Marcus agreed. They went into the warehouse hand in hand, ready to face whatever came next together. The road ahead would undoubtedly be difficult, but Eleanor had learned over the past year that the best things in life were worth fighting for. She had started this journey trying to save her family's legacy, and she had ended up finding something far more valuable: a partnership built on trust, respect, and love. As they worked side by side through the rest of the afternoon, occasionally stealing glances and smiles, Eleanor thought about her father's final words about finding joy. She had found it, in the most unexpected place, and with the most unlikely person. And she knew that whatever challenges the future held, she and Marcus would face them together, as partners in every sense of the word. Their story was just beginning, and Eleanor couldn't wait to see where it would lead. The Moon Princess, as some of their business associates had started calling her for her ability to illuminate their operations and guide them through darkness, had found her Alpha King. And together, they would build an empire that would last for generations.